Hello and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero and I'll be your host this evening. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm a low stakes specialist, a poker coach, and I've been a pro for well over a decade and a half. I currently live and have been playing poker out of Las Vegas for the last 10 years or so. Those of you who are familiar with my channel know that I don't play very long sessions. I take every precaution to strengthen my mental fortitude. This helps me ward off tilt, meanwhile ensure that I continue to play my A game. This means I nap before every session. I don't eat while I play. I try to keep my sessions short and concise, and I limit myself to a 2 buy-in rule. I have an extremely high win rate and hourly, but on the downside, I don't play very many sessions a week, and I don't play for very long. It's very much possible to make way more money than I do on a monthly basis simply by putting in more hours and more effort. But if you like the concept of being a lazy bum like me and still make over $10,000 a month consistently whenever I actually do put in some part-time hours, then maybe this is the channel for you. On my channel, I break down every notable hand that I play so you can get my thought process and decide for yourself if I'm just a lucky fish or someone actually worth watching. In this episode, get ready for an exciting double header. We start with a 2-5 session, but end with a 1-3 session once my 2-5 table breaks. As usual, we'll be playing 2-5 no limit hold'em at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, where I bind for 1,500, which is 300 big blinds. It's Friday night on November the 15th, although technically Saturday morning since we don't start until 2:24 in the morning. Okay, so this first hand is nothing exciting, but I wanted to go over a couple of concepts in my thought process. 14 minutes into the session, the middle position limps when the hijack opens for 20, with a full stack of at least 1,500. It folds around to me in the small blind, where I'm holding Ace King of Hearts. I recognize that 20 is a pretty small open size, especially after one limper. We are up against a fellow professional poker player named Ed, who also regularly plays at the Wynn. Ed can be a bit tricky, so he doesn't necessarily have a weak hand here like a recreational player might. However, he's mostly on the tighter side, with very few floats and very few bluffs in his arsenal. You ever watch that old comedy show, Married with Children? You know how Al Bundy, aka Ed O'Neill, only does the deed like twice a year? Once on Christmas and once on Peggy's birthday? Well, Ed the Poker Pro probably bluffs close to that same frequency. So, as you may have heard, Ace King is a drawing hand. It's not a made hand like a pocket pair. You'll miss 2 out of 3 flops. That's just the mathematics. On top of that, I have terrible position here in the small blind. So what I want to do is 3-bet this hand to an amount that will reduce the number of callers in the hand. It gets a little bit tricky when I have a fellow professional poker player in position against me as the original raiser though. If I raise too big here, Ed will just use his position to trap me with a hand as strong as pocket kings or aces. He makes moves like this quite often in fact. So I want to choose an amount that will most likely kick out any loose stragglers, meanwhile provoke Ed to reveal the strength of his hand if he 4-bets. So I 3-bet the action up to $80. Using this bet sizing, I can also potentially take down the pot without seeing a flop. My plan works as everyone else folds, but Ed puts in the call. The flop comes 7, deuce, 8 with 2 clubs and a heart. We don't flop anything at all except a backdoor flush draw, meanwhile holding 2 random overcards. Normally, on an 8-high flop where I have super low equity, meaning I completely miss the board and don't have any meaningful draws or pairs, I would just check and give up. However, I don't do anything 100% of the time. You need to mix in a bit of randomization into your game so as to not be predictable. Secondly, you need to always be consciously aware of who your opponent is. I play very differently versus pros as opposed to playing versus those who play recreationally. What do we know about Ed? We know that he rarely floats with air. His raise sizing pre-flop, combined with the fact that he only just smooth called my decent sized 3-bet, indicates he has one of 2 most likely hands. Either he has a middling pocket pair of some sort, or suited connectors. We're currently losing to all of his pairs, but we're still beating a lot of his suited connector range. Hands like 9-10, 10-jack, all of his suited ace-high, and such like and such forth. I decide to put in an extremely tiny c-bet of 35 into the pot of 170. This is a nonsensical bet sizing. I would never choose this bet sizing against any other opponent, especially on a board this wet. A bet of this size will allow Ed to vote out all of his hands that completely miss the flop. Meanwhile, encourage him to raise with any of his potential monsters. If he only just calls here, we'll know he doesn't have a set, two pairs, or anything of the like. This bet sizing is designed to cap his range. If Ed only just calls, he either has a draw or a pretty weak one pair holding at best. We can apply pressure on future streets, especially if any high cards hit the board, even if we're not actually holding them. Thankfully, we won't need to go that far, as Ed simply just folds and we take down this small pot. Would I ever choose this bet sizing with an actual strong hand on this flop? Absolutely not. I have no strong hands that would bet this tiny here. You see, being an exploitative player completely opens yourself to being exploited. Shouldn't I use a more GTO approach by choosing an appropriate bet sizing regardless of my actual hand strength? In theory, if I have no strong hands here that would choose this bet sizing, wouldn't it be really easy to dismantle my play to bluff me? In theory, yes. However, does it ever actually happen in practice? Well, if even a fellow professional poker player who's played against me for years wasn't able to take notice of my small sizing to raise me here and steal the pot, then I can confidently answer that no, it doesn't happen enough at the low stakes for me to worry about it. Even many pros at these stakes aren't at the level of properly analyzing your range to take advantage of your bet sizes. However, if you watch enough of my videos, maybe you will be able to pick up this essential skill. Here I limp in the middle position with pocket fives. Many wannabe experts and would-be pros would lead you to believe that you should never limp, ever. To that I say, get the heck out of here with that shiz. I'm gonna reiterate that I almost never do anything 100% of the time. It's perfectly fine to limp with small pocket pairs. You should have the implied odds to call raises even on the bigger side, as long as you're not playing short stacked. Sometimes I will open raise with the smallest of pairs, like pocket threes. Meanwhile, other times, I will only just limp maybe as strong as up to pocket sevens. This strategy keeps true to my advice to vary your play style. So here the low jack and cutoff also limp. The small blind folds and the big blind checks. We go four-handed to a beautiful flop of 3, 5, 9 rainbow. We flop middle set on a pretty disconnected board without any meaningful draws, aside from deuce 4 and 4, 6. When the big blind checks, I lead with a tiny bet of $10. Interestingly enough, all three of my opponents call. The turn brings in an unfavorable card in the form of a 7 of hearts, putting 2 hearts on board, meanwhile completing the only possible draws on the flop. 4-6 completes the open-ended straight draw, and 8-6 actually makes the nuts. Big blind checks again. I don't need to play super defensive here, since even if someone did turn a straight, the pot is so small that I should be able to comfortably call a raise to draw to a full house. So I lead for a second time with a 2/3 pot size bet of 40 into the pot of 60. The low jack calls, but the other two opponents fold. The river couldn't be much prettier. It's another 7. Diamonds this time, improving our hand to a full house. We now actually beat a slow played straight, although we do lose to any full house containing a 7. That shouldn't be a concern though, because anyone who turned 2 pairs would have most likely raised our turn bet. So this time, I decide on an overbet for max value. I fire out a third bullet, for 150 this time. I'm targeting hands that contain a 7, like 6-7 or 7-8. Hands that would have flopped a gut shot draw and turned a pair to go along with their draw. Perfectly reasonable hands in this circumstance. A disbelieving 9 might also call me here as well. Surely enough, my opponent makes the call. I table my hand, and he voluntarily turns over ace-7 of spades for a hand that floated the flop with absolute air, only to backdoor trip 7s. I'm actually surprised he didn't raise me on that river with such a hand, considering in his mind the runout was probably as favorable as possible, given his particular hand. I mean, I don't understand what you expect to hit when you float the flop with nothing at all and go runner-runner trips with an ace kicker. Regardless, we are thankful for the donation. 20 minutes later, we're currently down to 5-handed. I open to 20 on the button with pocket 9s, which is a way above average hand compared to the garbage I normally open with on the button. The small blind folds, when the big blind suddenly 3-bets me to 135 with a snack of about 3,000. I've never played with this particular opponent, so I'm not sure whether he's using a large sizing to get me to fold, or whether he's trying to protect his really deep stack. Both could be true, considering I'm also pretty deep right now with a stack close to 1800 or so. If I had sensed any weakness or knew my opponent better, I might actually 4-bet here, but since I don't have that information, I only just smooth call. I do have position after all, so no need to further bloat up this pot unnecessarily. The flop comes ace, queen, 8, rainbow. This is an atrocious flop. So when my opponent downbets to 90, I have no choice here but to fold. If you're new to the channel, you may think that 90 is a small bet into a pot of 270, but the flop is completely polarizing with no apparent draws aside from 10 jack very specifically. A down bet here is perfectly appropriate, regardless of my opponent's actual hand holding, whether he's making a play with some sort of random suited connectors, a tiny pocket pair, or a hand as strong as top set. About 40 minutes later, the middle position opens to 15. The cutoff and button both call, but the small blind folds. I have ace queen, which is a well above average hand, but my position is pretty terrible in the big blind. When playing low stakes live cash games, people generally let you know the strength of their hand with how large they raise pre-flop. Most players here in the US shy away from the GTO approach of always raising 3x with your playable hands, regardless of hand strength. You mostly only see this online, and possibly in higher stakes. So when I see a 3x raise and a couple of callers, I like to think that ace-queen is well ahead of most of their ranges, so I 3-bet the action up to 80. This sizing is designed to potentially take down the pot right here and now, while also reducing the number of players in the hand, so that in the event that we don't actually hit, we might still be able to steal the pot. If the original raiser had opened with a 5x raise, for instance, I would have only just smooth called here in this spot, since he might actually have ace-king or better, and I don't exactly have a very good position. Keep in mind my analysis for these raise amounts are specifically targeted towards Las Vegas players and playstyles. Your particular casino may have a very different raising structure. So for my $80 3-bet, the middle position ends up folding, but it's the cutoff who makes the call. Meanwhile, the button folds. The cutoff is more of a calling station type of player, so I hope I get a favorable flop, because you should never try to bluff a calling station. Thankfully, the flop comes jack, deuce, queen, with 2 diamonds and a club. We flop top pair with top kicker on a pretty dynamic board. Let's try to keep in all of our opponent's dominated hands, meanwhile provoke him to raise if he actually flopped a monster with jack-queen suited or pocket deuces. I down bet to 65 into the pot of 190. Now, if you're a 1-3 player, you may be wondering why my continuation bet is so small with proportion to the pot. This is because it's a heads-up situation in a pretty decently large 3-bet pot. Our opponent is not very deep, only starting this hand with less than 500 in his stack. And in these sorts of configurations, it's alright to down bet small, even on seemingly wet dynamic boards. We're doing this to gain information, keep in our opponent's entire range of dominated hands, meanwhile still bet for value. So for my tiny c-bet, my opponent makes the call. The turn brings in a 7 of clubs. Good, this shouldn't change anything. Since our opponent didn't raise us on the flop, we almost certainly have the best hand right now. So now I want to go for max value. Our opponent has about $340 remaining in his stack, and the pot is currently $320. Sure, I could go for an all-in shove here, but such a bet will fold out pretty much anything other than a flush draw or a combo draw. And I'd still really like to keep in a dominated queen or perhaps some sort of open-ended draw. Let's say our opponent really does have some sort of queen here, like queen 10 suited for instance. He may still find a fold for an overbet. But if we split up our bets into 2 separate bets, one on the turn and one on the river, he may feel committed with each betting street. Let's say you're in a similar situation, but you think your opponent is the sort who will never fold a draw here. Then you should most definitely go for an all-in shove at this point. If I didn't actually flop something monstrous and wanted to bluff this hand, like for instance if I were holding ace-king instead of ace-queen, I would instead go for the overbet all-in shove here to fold out all of our opponent's one-pair holdings here like jack-x or possibly some middling pocket pairs. But since I have a value hand, I shoot out a bet of 200 into the pot of 320. Once again, our opponent makes the call, leaving himself only $140 left in his stack. The river is either overkill or a card we don't actually want to see. It's an ace of hearts. We improved to top 2 pairs, but King 10 does make the nut straight. Still, our opponent only has $140 left, and the pot is already $720, so I just shove all in for the remainder of his stack. He quickly makes the fold, but we do scoop this sizable pot. The very next hand, under the gun opens to 25. We look down at the luscious ladies in the cutoff, pocket queens. I'm hesitant to make a mistake immediately after just winning a nice sized pot, so instead of screwing around with some sort of small 3-bet, I raise the action up to 125. Surprisingly, the button cold calls. Alarm bells start to ring here. This player is more on the conservative side, so his bare minimum hand making such a large cold call is probably like pocket jacks. I really hope he's closer to the bottom end of his range here. I intended to put the under the gun player all in with my bet sizing, but I wasn't planning for the button to cold call my 3-bet. Surely enough, the under the gun player does end up going all in for his last remaining 168, which is only $43 more on top of my 125 raise. Without any other options, the button and I are only allowed to just smooth call, so that's what we do. The flop comes deuce 10-9 with 2 spades and a diamond. We flop an overpair, but against the button's range, we're only very specifically beating pocket jacks. We're currently heads up to a dry side pot, meaning there is no side pot to speak of. So I start with an incredibly small continuation bet for 100 into the pot of 511. Unsurprisingly, our opponent raises my tiny bet up to 300. Sure, we can most certainly be beat right now, but it might be possible he really is only holding pocket jacks and is only raising us since our flop bet was so deceptively small. I'm hoping that's the case. I mean, even his raise is still only another $200 more for me to call, and after the flop action, the new pot is now a staggering $911. So obviously I can't go anywhere just yet, so I make the tentative call. The turn brings in an unsightly jack of spades, completing the front door flush, meanwhile allowing the only pocket pair in our opponent's range that we had beat on the flop to now catch up. Thankfully, we are in fact holding the queen of spades, so even if our opponent really were holding pocket jacks for top set, we do have a ton of outs with our open-ended straight draw and a backdoor flush draw, as well as a queen draw. So knowing all of this, and taking into consideration our opponent raised us on the flop, I put in a check, fully prepared to call a decent sized bet. Thankfully, our opponent checks the action back. Maybe he's afraid of the flush draw completing and wants to do a bit of pot control. The river brings in a beautiful queen of diamonds. We improve to top set. We now beat all of the flopped or even the turn sets. Unfortunately, there is admittedly a 1-card straight on board, however. We lose to pocket kings or something similar. Without position, I can't exactly try to bet for value here, so I just check again. And once again, our opponent checks the action back. I table our top set of queens, and he voluntarily turns over a slow-played pocket aces. Pocket freaking rockets. We win this one because our opponent got greedy and tried to slow play his hand. What do I always say about slow playing, right guys? If our opponent had just 4-bet pre-flop and then slammed another pot-sized bet or similar on the flop, there's a very good chance I would have just most likely folded, since I know our opponent to be a more conservative type of player. So after this hand, I play for another 10 minutes or so before the table breaks, and since I've only been playing for a short while, I decide to move over to the 1-3 to finish off the evening. In for 1500 and out for 2585 for a delectable profit of $1,085 after an hour and 33 minutes of playtime. I cash out my chips and buy into the 1-3 for $500, which is the max. I'm hoping to get more footage for the vlog. Hey guys, if you're looking to play some poker this holiday season and you can't make it out to Vegas for the WPT, don't forget you can still play online. It's currently legal, even in the United States, and you can get the details below. I am currently still offering my $500 monthly cash drawing, and there's only a couple of videos left. You can still qualify for my $5,000 end of the year cash drawing as well, so I hope to see you there. Okay, are you guys ready for some absolute insanity? because this hand's about to get a little bit spicy. The very first hand that I play, I pick up pocket 9s and open to 15 under the gun. This is a larger than normal raise for this particular hand holding in these stakes. I would normally only open to $10 with such a hand, but as I often preach, you never want to do anything 100% of the time. Very occasionally I'll open 5x with some of my 3x hands, and sometimes I'll open 3x with some of my 5x hands, like pocket aces. This sort of intermingling with my opening range allows for a bit of deception and confusion, making it much harder for my opponents to accurately pinpoint my hand range. So for my $15 raise, the low jack calls when the cutoff suddenly 3-bets to 60 with a stack of about 800. We have just enough in both of our stacks to set mine, since we only need to call $45 more, and we both started the hand with at least $500. So I'm getting more than the 10-to-1 bare minimum that I require to set mine with if I think I'm behind. However, when I first sat down to this table waiting for a playable hand, I saw this particular opponent raise the very last hand to $20 with 4-7 of spades. That's an incredibly large open amount, especially with such a garbage hand that I wouldn't even limp $3 for. So what does that tell me? We're dealing with some sort of action player. We may actually be ahead right now. So obviously I make the call, but the low jack gets out of the way. We go heads up, out of position, to flop a 5-8-3 with 2 hearts and a spade. We maintain an overpair, but if our opponent had us beat pre-flop, this is the worst kind of flop we want to see. A lot of recreational players will see this sort of flop and make the mistake of leading with a pot-sized bet with our current hand holding. They think to themselves, this is a great flop, so they need to protect their hand and bet now to get random overcards to fold. However, I'm here to tell you that is a disastrous mistake. Why, you ask? Well, if you make a pot-sized bet here, yes, you'll most likely get hands like ace-king and ace-queen suited to fold. But do you think you'll get any overpairs that are bigger than yours to fold? So basically, by leading with a large bet here, you'll fold out all the weaker hands, meanwhile keeping in only larger hands that have you completely crushed. That's a terrible way to play poker. Instead, I start with a check. This will keep in all of my opponent's bluffs, meanwhile give us a chance to improve in case we're actually behind. I mean, if our opponent really does intend to bluff here with 2 random overcards, he only has 6 outs after all, which is considerably less than an open-ended draw. I'm okay with giving such a hand a free card, if that means we get to gain some information depending upon his bet sizing. So after I check, the cutoff throws out a strong continuation bet of 75 into the pot of 139. He would do this with all of his bluffs, as well as his value hands if he were any sort of good player. We don't gain any information from that sort of bet sizing. We can't fold an overpair just yet though to a single bet. That would be nonsensical. So I make the call. We can always reevaluate after the turn. So the turn comes, and it brings in an unsightly ace of diamonds. Okay, now I'm completely done with this hand. If I weren't behind before, I should definitely be behind now. So I check again, fully planning to fold to another bet. Oddly enough, our opponent does not in fact bet. He checks this time. If he has any sort of big starting pair, this ace shouldn't change anything. There's no reason I would randomly be holding an ace here unless I were very specifically holding an ace-high flush draw. But of all the hands I could be holding, that's the one hand that would randomly spike an ace here. Still, 1-3 players are super weird, as we've discussed many times previously on the channel, so I wouldn't put it past my opponent to check back a large pair here. So the river comes, and it brings out yet another ace, spades this time. Oh phew! I was concerned if our opponent had bet on the turn, but this second ace definitely relieves my fears. I think we're pretty good at this point. Still, there's no point in betting and chasing out all of our opponent's bluffs, so I check for a third time. And get this. This might be terrifying for those watching, but our opponent shoves all in with a stack that covers us. Okay, so are you ready for this? I calmly move my phone to get a better camera angle for the action as well as the board for the vlog. And then I almost instantly make the call without even taking 5 seconds to think about it. our opponent tables 4-5 of spades, and we get an immediate double up the first hand we play after coming to this 1-3 table. That trick our opponent tried to pull may have worked if he were up against another 1-3 recreational player. But bro, you're up against a low stakes pro. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. An ace would have most likely shoved on the turn, and any pair higher than ours wouldn't go for such ridiculous value on the river. Keep in mind this mental dissection will not apply 100% of the time, or against 100% of players, but with my level of experience, I trust my judgment enough to make the call without even giving it a second thought. We win just over $500 to start off our journey into this 1-3 vlog. A few minutes later, the hijack limps. I look down at King 10 of clubs in the small blind. This is a pretty decent hand, but our position sucks. I can play it a couple of different ways. I can put in a small pot building raise to like 10 or so, which may or may not bring along the big blind, but that will pretty much cap my opening hand range. I don't mind using this tactic if there were more players in the hand. We stand to win a much bigger pot in case we flop something monstrous. It's almost like set mining with a small pocket pair and playing the lottery. You get everyone else to risk a few extra bucks, and if you get lucky with a magnificent flop, you stand to win a much larger pot. And if you don't flop anything amazing, then it's alright to just give up on your $10 lottery ticket. However, in this hand, we're only going to be three-handed at most, and the hijack limping in late position means his hand can't be all that strong. So instead, I decide to play this hand a bit more aggressive than its actual hand strength. I raise the action up to a respectable $20. Being able to recognize and adapt to different situations in which you can treat the exact same hand as a much stronger hand is part of an exploitative playstyle and makes your hand range much more difficult to analyze. So for my $20 raise, the big blind gets out of the way, but the hijack makes the call. We go heads up, out of position, to a flop of queen, 4, 10, all spades. We flop middle pair with a great kicker, but that's not saying a whole lot on this sort of flop. Since I'm out of position, I start with a check. My opponent throws out a 3/4 pot-sized bet of 30 into the pot of 43. This is a very strong bet. If he just flopped a simple queen, we are drawing very poorly. And if he flopped a set of 4s or a flush, then we're drawing very close to dead. Against a recreational player, this would just be a clear fold. However, I'm going to adjust my play towards my very specific opponent. I recognize him as a 1-3 pro, who's generally on the tighter side. Now, some of you critics and keyboard warriors might argue there's no such thing as a 1-3 pro. To that, I will argue you don't have to make $100K a year or even $50K a year to be considered a pro. There's nothing wrong with making $2,000 to $3,000 a month, being able to set your own hours, and not have a boss to worry about. It certainly beats a minimum wage job.
Ding, fries it done. Ding, fries it done. Would you like an apple pie with that?
Being a professional poker player simply means you play poker for a living. That's the only qualification. I know that I myself, in my very long career as a poker professional, have had to sink down to the 1-3 stakes on many different occasions due to poor bankroll management and a debilitating gambling addiction. I know of many other amazing poker pros who have had to do the same due to drug or alcohol addictions. So just because someone plays 1-3 doesn't mean they don't deserve the rightfully earned title of being a pro. So anyways, since my opponent is a recognized professional, I know that he could be betting here with much lighter than top pair. He may just be betting to take advantage of the fact that I checked and he has position. He might be putting me on an ace-high type of hand. So even with only middle pair and no meaningful draws, I make the call. The turn brings in an 8 of diamonds, not helping us whatsoever. Jack 9 also completes a straight. Thankfully, when I check here for a second time, our opponent seems to give up and check the action back. Perfect. There's a very good chance we could have the best hand right now. The river brings in a much desired king of hearts, improving our hand to 2 pairs. This is preferable to hitting another 10, since if we were already ahead on the turn, we wouldn't really need another 10. However, hitting a king here could potentially get us paid in case our opponent were open-ended on the flop with a hand like King Jack and just hit this king on the river. I can't think of any other situations where our opponent would be holding just a naked king here. Admittedly, if our opponent really were holding King Jack, he should have just come into the hand with an open raise instead of a limp, but 1-3 pros don't exactly use the same tactics that I do. If I check here, my opponent will almost definitely check this river back, and we do not want that to happen. So I fire out a half pot size bet of 55 for value. Unfortunately, our opponent makes a pretty quick fold, but we do take down a decent sized pot for a heads up hand. Half an hour later, Under the Gun opens for 15 with a stack of about 620. He's the same action player whom we hero called in that first hand of 1-3 that we played this morning with our pocket nines. I looked down at one of my favorite one pair hands. Pocket freaking aces. The Rambo of live action poker. A $15 open is a pretty big open size, and we're both pretty deep, so I size up accordingly and 3-bet the action up to 60 in the cutoff. Had our opponent only opened to 10, then I would have 3-bet to about 40. We also have position, so this is a pretty ideal situation. Don't use a silly size like a min-click to 30 or something similar, just because you've been waiting all night for aces. This can potentially invite lots of other players into the hand with undetermined hand ranges, and you definitely do not want that. Always remember that as soon as the chips hit the middle, it belongs to the pot and is no longer yours. You never want to give your opponents a good price to crack your big hands. So for my considerable raise, everyone else folds, but the action player makes the call. The flop comes king, deuce 4, rainbow. We maintain an overpair, only realistically losing to a set of deuces or fours. So when our opponent checks, since this board is pretty disconnected, I start with a down bet to 40 into the pot of 124. If our opponent has never played against a professional, he's going to be really confused about our down bet and mistake it for a weak hand. Surely enough, he makes the call. The turn brings in a jack of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board. King Jack has caught up to take the lead, but that aside, we should still be holding the best hand here against an overwhelming number of different hands. So when our opponent checks again, we can't pass up this opportunity to gain more value from our hand. If we face a check raise, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I up the aggression with a bet of 120 into the pot of 204, sizing up our opponent's stack for a pot-sized river jam. After a noticeable delay, our opponent makes the call. The river brings in a 3 of spades. Ace-5 makes a straight, but that aside, we're still crushing hands like Ace-King and King-Queen. I think given the dynamics of the board, if our opponent had us beat with a hand like King-Jack for instance, we would have heard about it on the turn. Although, realistically, if our opponent had a hand like Ace-King, we probably would have heard about that on the flop. So, arriving at this river, our opponent checks for a 3rd time. I take my time and don't immediately act. I certainly don't want to give our opponent any timing tells. Eventually, as if I just needed to work up the courage for a large bluff, I announce all in. Our opponent should have a stack of about 400 remaining, which is just under the pot of 444. This all-in shove is very specifically targeted towards our young opponent, who's proven himself to be an action player and probably someone willing to make a hero call. He may not even be holding a king here. If our opponent were some unknown player, I'd probably go for a smaller value of like closer to 200 because I would prefer a guaranteed call. This sort of targeted bet sizing is the bread and butter of an exploitative playstyle. Let's say I arrived at this river with a hand that has no showdown value, like Ace-Queen. My bet sizing on the turn would be a bit smaller, maybe closer to like $60, so that on this river, we have larger stacks with proportion to the pot, allowing me more freedom to make more terrifying river bluffs. Instead of a pot of 444, with a remaining stack of 400, the pot would only be 324, and our opponent would have 460 remaining, meaning a shove here as a bluff would get a range fold from almost everything he's holding, most likely even including a hand like King-Queen. Paying attention to an opponent's stack with regards to the outcome you are trying to accomplish is incredibly important when trying to balance SPR, otherwise known as stack to pot ratio. Very few opponents in the low stakes are willing to call overbets with one pair types of holdings. So if you are trying to pull off a huge bluff, make sure your opponent has quite a bit more remaining in his stack than the size of the pot. And if you're trying to get all of your opponent's chips, space out your bets so that your opponent has less than a pot-sized bet remaining. This is admittedly very advanced strategy, however. For my low stakes players, I usually advise staying away from the bluffing portion of this strategy, meanwhile still paying attention to the value bet sizing. So since our opponent is facing a considerable shove for all of his chips, he tanks. and rightfully so. But unfortunately, after just over 2 minutes, he eventually does put in the fold. 10 minutes later, I open to 15 under the gun with ace-king offsuit. The hijack and cutoff both call. We go 3 ways out of position to flop of 10, 4, 10, rainbow. We don't flop anything whatsoever, but it is conceivable we might still be holding the best hand right now. On paired boards, I like to continue with small c-bets regardless of what I'm actually holding, whether it's trips, an overpair, or in this case, 2 random overcards. So I throw out a c-bet of 17 into the pot of 49. Obviously, I would prefer if both of our opponents just folded here. The hijack folds, but the cutoff makes the call. The turn brings in an 8 of hearts, putting 2 hearts on board. With very little equity, and drawing completely dead to trip 10s, I slow down and put in a check. My opponent throws out a bet of 35 into the pot of 83, with a stack of about 500. Earlier, this opponent was incredibly aggressive with second pair when checked to, betting full pot size bets. So when he bets this small, this is actually very concerning to me. I don't really want to attempt a big bluff here against an opponent with an uncapped range, especially when I'm out of position and could potentially be drawing dead, so I just put in the fold. When I say my opponent is uncapped, I mean there's no reason why he can't have pocket 4s here, 8-10 suited for the top boat, or even quads. And when your opponent's range is that strong, especially if you have complete air, it's better to just let it go. Let it go, let it go. We go card dead without any notable hands for over 45 minutes, until this hand here, where the hijack limps and the cutoff raises to 15. We've lost a few players, so we're down to only 6-handed currently. I have queen 10 of clubs in the small blind, and with 2 suited Broadway cards, this hand is certainly worth defending, even for a 5x raise, so I make the call. The big blind calls, and the hijack limper calls as well, so we go 4-handed to flop a 5, 3, 6, rainbow. We don't flop anything whatsoever, not even a backdoor draw of any kind. But thankfully, after I start with a check, the action checks around. The turn brings in a 10 of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board. We've improved to top pair, but we only have a mediocre kicker. The board is wet as heck, with all sorts of straight draws, as well as the backdoor flush draw. With everyone having checked the flop, however, I think our hand is good enough to try to go for some value. So I lead with a half pot size bet of 30 into the pot of 60. Surprisingly, the big blind throws out a considerable raise to 90. Being in the big blind, he's the player I was most concerned about that could have smashed the flop. In a normal instance, against a recreational player, this would just be an easy fold. However, I've seen this player pull quite a few moves in the time I've been on the table. He's definitely what I would consider an action player. He may only be on a draw of some sort. So after the 2 other opponents fold, I put in the call, with plans of calling a river bet as long as the board doesn't change. So the river comes, and it's a card we do not enjoy seeing very much. It's the ace of diamonds, completing the backdoor flush draw. Dejectedly, I check to the aggressor, and undaunted, he fires out a considerable bet of 150. If I weren't already behind on the turn, I should most likely be behind now by this river. The only hand we're realistically beating right now is a missed straight draw, but I think there's a higher chance that our opponent actually has the backdoor flush draw since he didn't raise until the turn. This is assuming he doesn't already have a made hand like 2 pairs or better. There aren't a whole lot of players in the 1-3 league that raise with complete air, so I decided to just give this player the benefit of the doubt and put in the fold. But as soon as I do, he tables king 5 offsuit with the king of diamonds. He turned his pair of 5s into a bluff, using the king of diamonds as a blocker to the nuts. I was shocked. That was actually an incredibly good move, and certainly Aero approved. It's similar to a lot of moves I pulled in other vlogs, knowing that I can't beat the card on the turn, but if I turn my hand into a raise, I can throw off my opponents into thinking I am much stronger than I actually am. Well played, my guy. Now I have to account for not 1, but 2 action players on the table. Turning a hand with some small showdown value into a bluff is definitely not a move that most recreational players know how to make, so my hat's off to this guy. After that first amazing hand, it's been rough here on this table. I go card dead for yet another 45 minutes without getting a single notable hand to show for it. Here, I finally wake up with ace-king offsuit again, and open to 15 in the low jack. The hijack, button, and small blind all call, so we go 4 ways to a flop of 8, 4, jack with 2 hearts and a diamond. As usual, we flop a whole lot of diddly squat. Now maybe you guys will understand why ace-king is considered a drawing hand. Thankfully, the action checks around. The turn brings in a 5 of hearts, putting 3 hearts on board. 6-7 makes a straight. Holding the ace of hearts, we've improved to the nut flush draw to go along with our 2 overcards, which actually isn't too bad of a hand considering everyone checked on the flop. So after the small blind checks, I throw out a half pot size bet of 30, hoping to either take the pot down right here and now, or improve to a hand that can take it down by the river. The hijack calls when the button suddenly raises to 125 with a stack of about 400. The small blind folds and the action is to me. This is not ideal. The button is raising into multiple opponents on a board with 3 hearts. He shouldn't have any other hand here than a flush. Against a flush, we only have 7 outs, considering there are 3 on the board, 2 in his hand, and 1 in ours. In a deck of 52 starting cards, with 4 cards on the board, 2 cards in the button's hand, and 2 in ours, there are 44 cards left unaccounted for. The 2 cards the hijack is currently holding, along with the cards other players have folded, as well as the cards that have been burned, are unknowns, so we treat them as if they're still part of the deck. They may or may not contain any hearts, so since we don't know, we simply don't factor them into the equation. With 44 cards unaccounted for, only 7 of which will improve our hand to an ace-high flush, that gives us only a 15.9% chance of improving against another flush. On top of that, if a 6 or a 7 of hearts hits the board, we may not even get the best hand, because our opponent could improve to a straight flush. So, once you factor all of that in, then you have to keep in mind that even the simplest of Jerrys and Homers out there will be able to see when a 4th heart hits the board. So our ace-high flush won't be disguised at all, assuming it even hits. So the odds of us getting paid are extremely small. At this point, a lot of amateur players will make the mistake of calling here with our hand, but the math just simply doesn't justify a call. So after doing the mental gymnastics, I gather up my courage and make a disciplined fold. This is the sort of fold I can only make while playing my A game, which is why I keep my sessions short and concise to around 4 hours or so. Here, the middle position opens to 15. The low jack and button both call. Once again, with 2 suited Broadway cards in the form of King 10 of diamonds in the small blind, this hand is definitely worth defending. So I make the call, and the big blind calls as well. We go 5-handed, out of position, to flop of deuce, 8-7 with 2 hearts and a diamond. As per usual, we whiff yet another flop. So obviously, I have no choice but to check. The action checks around, past the middle position original raiser, all the way to the button, who throws out a half pot size bet of 35 into the pot of 75. We only have 2 random overcards and a backdoor diamond draw, but when our opponent is betting pretty small into an extremely wet, dynamic board, I start getting devious intentions. I think a strong hand here would bet at least 50, if not higher, especially when this pot is currently 5-handed and multiple people could be holding straight and flush draws. So I decide on a tentative call, and the middle position calls as well. The turn brings in a 9 of clubs, improving our hand to an open-ended straight draw to go along with our 2 overcards. This is absolutely perfect. I check again to double check the boundaries of our opponent hand ranges. The middle position checks as well, and the button continues with another bet, but for only 55 this time, into the pot of 180, with a stack of about 325. Once again, this is an extremely weak bet. If the button only has a 1 pair type of holding, like for instance if he only just has an 8, he's been demoted to 2nd pair. His bet sizing, both on the flop and now confirmed a 2nd time on the turn, tells us everything we need to know about his hand strength. He wants to get value out of the various draws, but he doesn't want to risk too much in case he's behind. This is a problem that many recreational players face, and it's one that I plan to capitalize on. The middle position most likely only called the flop since he was getting such a great price, and he may not be holding anything whatsoever except 2 random overcards, probably some ace-high type of hand. We can most likely discredit his hand altogether. Factoring all of this in, I put in the good old-fashioned arrow check raise to 200. Instead of holding 10 king of diamonds here, if you squint really hard, there's no reason why I can't be holding 10 jack of diamonds, which would have just turned the nut straight. And with 10 jack of diamonds, I would have played this hand the exact same way, except I would have had a lot more equity on the flop. Surely enough, our masterful plan gets through as both opponents simply just fold. Playing our hand this way is how I like to properly use fold equity to win pots without needing to actually hit. Simply calling on the turn would be an amateur mistake that a lot of recreational players are more likely to make. By simply just calling, even if a 6 or a jack hits the river, the board would contain 4 to a straight. So do you really think someone is going to pay us off if they're only holding an 8 here? And what's worse, what if the river is a 6 or jack of hearts, and we make our straight only for someone else to make a flush? We would end up losing even more money. But since both of our opponents were holding such weak hand ranges based on the bet sizing with relevance to the pot, playing our hand aggressively allowed us to win a pot of over $200 with just king high. After this hand, I play for almost another hour, but at that point, both of the action players have either busted or left the table, so I decide to rack up my chips and head to the cage. In for 500 and out for 965 for a respectable profit of $465 after 3 hours and 38 minutes of playtime. Sure, I was up nearly $800 at one point after winning the hand with the pocket aces, but I just couldn't make anything happen after that. Still, I can't complain about a nearly $500 win in less than 4 hours at the 1-3 stakes. If you combine our wins today from both the 2-5 as well as the 1-3, we profited over $1,500 in just over 5 hours. If you guys like what you saw today, remember to smash that like button. Hype this video if you get the option to. Subscribe to the channel if you want to learn more tips and tricks on how to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em. Follow me on Instagram to find out about my monthly $500 cash raffles and the end of the year $5,000 cash raffle. Check out my Patreon if you want to see more of the coaching series, as well as to get early access to my vlogs. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.